Are we live? Am I live? I put my headphones on. Oopsies. Oh, and invite Catherine. Okay. There we go. Oh, well, let me put this thing on over here. This goes over here. And then this. Oh, cool. And post. And post. And I need Video Ninja. Video Ninja. Sit on to my ears. Create a room. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Yes, 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 yes. Oh, I haven't got the link yet, right? Okay, cool. Copy link and then go back. We need another. So no. Cool. Then okay. Hey everybody. Hold on, let me make sure I have I need the chat from Twitter somewhere on my screen as we're doing this. Chat and then pop out chat. Cool. All right. And now we just wait for Catherine because Catherine has the link. I don't have the link. I need the hey. Hold on. Yes, I am. I need the this one. Okay, cool. Yeah, I do not have the link. I do not. I'm excited about this. So before we get started, let's I guess talk a little bit of gym. You guide me because I don't know what to talk about right now because we know a lot of things. There's a lot of things. Oh shit. Hold on, let me make sure that they can hear you for right because I have two. Uh, Start a window. I'll do. Oh, fantastic. Okay, I'll just do that then. Let me go to. Raise it, raise it, raise it. Okay. Wait, wait. Give me 1 second so I can pull out the window so they can hear you. Because they need to enable the window. All right, now go ahead.
So the Russians are doing an international meet right now. The men's side has real people at it. Not a ton of real people, but like the Armenian Pommel boys and some real Kazakh people. Like they're not like, but the women's side is just the Russian women and like gymnasts they could pull off the streets. But I want to make fun of the name of this meet, which is called the Cup of the Strongest Athletes.
Right.
And when I posted the results on Reddit, everyone assumed I had made up the name.
Are the strongest athletes in the room with us right now?
That's a question to ask. Okay. Do we want to show the Russian Wonderkins bar save, which
oh my god
is kind of crazy?
Yeah, it was. That was kind of all such a crazy. Hold on, let me see. Let me find
it. Because that's got to be one of the great saves of the year so far, even though she then fell anyway. But like,
the good thing about this video is that we can then tear apart that damn graphic, which I'm so traumatized by.
Yeah, I think that this meet was a good way to show that this graphic is not what people think it is.
Not at all. Oh, god damn, we talk a lot.
I can find it for you if you want.
We talk so much. I think I'm close to it. I think I'm close. There, no. Oh, we have to talk about the spinning on the head thing.
I mean, it's clearly a thing. I just didn't believe it.
Catherine was like, that is CGI. And I was like, no, Catherine, I think that's real. And I had to look up, like, is that a thing? And yeah, apparently it's a thing, but
okay, I put the tweet in in the chat.
Okay, here we go.
And I'm also going to give you the beam since that also shows how the graphic is nonsense.
Okay.
But we're mostly showing you the bars video to show this insane save.
Yeah, so she goes up. Nice, stalled her. Into the Maloney. Stalled her, and then, oh, boop. Okay, and now I wanted to point out, this is great. She's fantastic. She's great. Whatever. I'm going to Worlds.
Yeah, she's a great gymnast.
Great
this is
gymnast.
just a bad.
And she's a child.
Bad routine.
Yeah, she's a child. So.
I mean, she's a second-year senior, but yeah.
Yeah. So I want to point out this graphic now. Quick note. You guys know I do graphics. Whatever. Usually, if you're hypothetically trying to do this graphic, just to break it down, you have variants of this, like these original like white lines, right? Mm-hmm. And so every time, at least this is how I guess they would do it. Every time that you fill a requirement, you then have to show one of those variants, whether it's a positive or negative, right? An affirmative or negative. This graphic is a pre-rendered animation. It keeps going. You can pause it, I'm sure, but it just keeps going as the routine goes on. There is no like actual.
It's not responding to what she's actually doing.
No, because if you watch, see there, and then even though she falls out of the turn, but she wouldn't get credit, it gives her credit for it.
Yeah, so you want to show her beam, where the graphic will give her credit for a triple wolf that she doesn't do. It's also,
Okay. Watch very closely. The graphics just going.
Yeah, so a lot of people will look at these Russian videos and say, oh, look at the graphic, why can't Fig do this? But, like, this is not a, like...
actual thing.
This is... Yeah, this is...
It's a pre-rendered graphic that just goes along with your routine. That's it. No one's sitting there, like, actually,
Yeah, verifying that she's actually doing the thing.
No.
It's a face culture thing. Like, they're trying to show them being sophisticated, but not actually being sophisticated.
Yeah, it's a sham.
You can see the branding of this meet in the back behind your head is the cup of the strongest athlete.
There. Give the credit for a triple and she did a double.
Yeah. So anyway, she's a good gymnast. She's going to be at Worlds. She's going to be a world all-around contender. But, like, also Russian scoring is weird.
Yes. Okay, so oh, right. Simone got boobs. Simone got boobs. Good for her. They look fantastic on her. I love that for you, Queen. I think that does it. That does it. We just rest our hats. Yeah. Like, you can't do gymnastics with boobs.
There's lots of things you can't, like, high-impact activities you can't do with those kinds of implants.
So, I mean,
if anybody, there's also the, like, change in center of gravity. If anybody could adjust to change in center of gravity, it's Simone. But, like, you can't risk those things bursting, and bad things happen to you if they burst.
Yeah, and she already had bad reactions to Botox, so it just, y'all, listen, I wanted Simone in LA. I was that girl. I was like, yes, Simone, but honestly...
I don't think this is the nail in the coffin, but I think it's a strong indication that she's not planning on it.
At least not the all-around. Which,
yeah.
If we're really going to talk about it, Simone was, bars wasn't her best event, so why not drop it?
Yeah, but, you wouldn't want to, like, fall on anything.
No.
Like, hitting the beam would be bad. Like, it's just not something you do and then continue to do gymnastics. I just want to caution, this is not, like, the end for certain, but it's a strong indication.
Yeah, she's moving on with her life. She's become a woman.
We should also point out, now that we're into Q3, it's been a year since USADA has done an out-of-competition test on Jade Carey. I think it's safe to say she's not in the testing pool.
Yeah.
Now, that also does not mean that she's retired, but she will need to be in the testing pool for 6 months before she can do any competition at all.
Yeah.
So...
Leanne's book came out.
Yeah. There's lots of interesting things in that and lots of interesting typos.
Oh my god. And teensy little microaggressions. Also, Armane's crazy.
I think we all knew Armane was crazy because she's married to Al, but like,
not that crazy. Like, and it's so evident once you see, like,
well, Ivana Hong said she was crazy.
True, true. And I just feel like Aloysius Fong doesn't. I mean, it was all textbook. You know.
I mean, I think so. I want to defend Ivana Hong here because I think she got lots of
Flack.
reputations for being crazy or difficult to work with, and so did Carrie Strug. And I think the answer is both of them had to deal with a bunch of really unreasonable coaches and spoke up for themselves.
I mean, and it's. I feel like not giving these athletes that agency to speak for themselves. It's really telling of the culture within the sport, even out in the parasocial manner.
I'm not gonna say anything about the context of this because I don't want to get an athlete in trouble. But there is also an athlete who is clearly where coaches are talking in front of her, and I don't think they realize she's either there or listening.
Right, and that's
And
not great.
how I mean, it's cool because she's getting more information than I think they realize, and she's a very smart young woman. But also imagine what it's like if people talking in front of you as if you weren't there.
That happens to me all the time.
Are you furniture to them? But anyway,
I guess I'm a nice lazy boy.
So we're not doing gym today. We're going to dig into some YouTube videos debunking the stupidest conspiracy theory in existence right now.
You've probably run into it. It is this whole conspiracy. It has a lot to do with the world fairs. Speaking of this incredible, so advanced society that once existed, and
yeah. So the first video we're gonna watch is from a Swedish YouTuber / politician. Make sure we're at the start of the video. I think this is a little bit in. This is Mia Mulder, who is a really interesting YouTuber. I'll put her channel in the chat just so that we're.
I just subscribe. You guys should subscribe as well.
Yeah, she's got a really great video on transvestigators.
Ooh.
And she's a really good follow.
All right, here
and she's when I say she's a Swedish politician, she's like a town councilor.
Oh.
At a small city in Sweden. So she's not like a big deal politician.
Oh, do you need
I need a video.
Yeah, you need video. That's right. Before I forget. Boom. There we are. Yes. Let's do this. Okay.
Nest flag. It was built in the Beaux Arts 205. The Singer Building in New York. In 1908, the Singer Building in New York became the tallest building in the world at 205 meters. Designed by architect Ernest Flagg, it was built in the Beaux Arts style, a French architectural style that prided itself on symmetry and references to classical styles involving columns, statues, and high ceilings.
You lost me, I'm here.
The facade was made out of red brick, light-colored stone, and terracotta, with the top of the tower containing a 15-meter tall dome
Video Ninja.
covering the top 3 stories.
Yeah.
It was a marvel of construction when it was built, but it wasn't very practical. Its narrow tower made it lack office space, and it wasn't very profitable.
Yeah, I'm here.
Especially compared to other.
So I still don't have video, but then now I have video.
Yeah, Video Ninja
The Daily
crashed.
News said that.
Okay, let's start it over.
In 1908, the Singer Building in New York became the tallest building in the world at 205 meters. Designed by architect Ernest Flagg, it was built in the Beaux Arts style, a French architectural style that prided itself on symmetry and references to classical styles involving columns, statues, and high ceilings.
Very gothic.
The facade was made out of red brick, light-colored stone, and terracotta, with the top of the tower containing a 15-meter tall dome covering the top 3 stories. It was a marvel of construction when it was built, but it wasn't very practical. Its narrow tower made it lack office space, and it wasn't very profitable, especially compared to other, larger styles of skyscraper that were built after it. The Daily
imagine trying to have a company in this wars.
Right. Called
we're watching
in 1967,
this thing about
torn down,
an advanced society,
building
Mason,
in history to ever be peacefully demolished. But what if that story isn't true? What if the real story is that the Singer Building was a relic from an ancient empire, and that its destruction was actually part of a coordinated global and ongoing campaign to lie to humanity about our true history?
We're expected to believe that they built things like this with a hammer and a chisel.
History wants us to believe that people that rode around in horse and buggies
Yeah, this is
built all of
TikTok
this.
brain.
The idea that the Singer Building was built by an ancient empire who used to control the world is part of a conspiracy theory known online as the Mud Flood Theory, or more simply, Tartaria. The theory states that the entire world used to be under the dominance of an Asian
I explained
European
where this theory comes to
Great
Adex like
Tartaria,
6 months
or
ago, and
Great
he's like
Tartary, depending
angry
on the
about it
US,
ever since.
who
Yeah, like
have
this is so
wielded
stupid. How
great
did
technology
why do people believe
and
this?
built the wonders of the world.
Because they don't know
operated
anything about
energy
the history
weapons,
she's
and
gonna
may actually
talk
have
about.
been led
Also,
by giants.
it also comes from Russia in a way.
Civilization around the 1800s.
This empire
It's
had its own architectural style, but advanced
there is
technology
a
that they could use
separate
to
Russian
extract
conspiracy
free
theory that this is
energy
a kind of
from
weird
the
mutation
ether.
of.
A technology that has since been lost. Because according to this theory, this empire fell.
So this is
between
like if
300
a
and
Russian
100
conspiracy
years ago.
theory made it to
How
TikTok
it
and
fell
TikTok
is a bit
had a baby.
unclear. People don't really have the answers to everything here because the new empires, modern day Russia, China, the UK, and the US, have hidden all traces of this ancient world-spanning
Oh, it's
civilization.
Klaus's birthday, by the way.
They want you to believe
Happy birthday,
that
Klaus.
it never actually existed. The main theory of how it fell, though, is that someone or something caused a mud flood. A mud flood that embedded most of the world and most cities under several feet of mud, burying much of the architecture of the Tartarian Empire. This is known as the Great Reset. Humanity had lived in a golden era for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, until this reset. And the world we're living in today, which is most of the modern world and modern history, is actually living in the post-apocalyptic dystopia. I
mean, we do live in a
post-apocalyptic
dystopia, but
is of course the reason why it's called the mud flood theory, but it's also the most prominent theory because apparently there's a lot of evidence of it. When you excavate cities, you oftentimes find things underground, buildings and windows and doors that seem to indicate that ground level used to be significantly lower than it is today. Right. And think about all the architecture that you're seeing today. How come all the pretty ornate buildings were all built 200 years ago? And today, everything is just built with concrete and glass. And even though we still have some of the buildings from Tartaria around today, what we're actually seeing is only the top of much larger structures, the bulk of which are underground, buried by the mud flood.
Then it was completely erased from the history books and rewritten in order to hide us from the truth. We were told that these were built by people that rode in horse and buggies. We're expected to believe that they built things like this with a hammer and a chisel.
So, obviously, this conspiracy theory is not true. It goes against everything we know about history and has seemingly formed from nothing. And there are also some similarities to other conspiracy theories, such as the ancient aliens built the pyramids, because there's an assumption that the ancient peoples simply didn't have the skills or the knowledge to construct the vast constructions that they did. How come they could build such ornate, beautiful buildings, but seemingly we can't? People keep saying we could build ornate cathedrals and monuments to greatness, but we never really do. It's always just
which is funny because there is a cathedral still being built in Bilbao, Spain.
Look as if it's a very popular theory,
family or
but
something?
on TikTok, a place where anyone can say anything.
It's
without
Gaudi
consequence,
is the architect.
become
It's an amazing
extremely
building.
popular.
Is it like the Sacred Family?
But,
The
like-
lost empire of
whatever?
Tartaria. As you can see,
called
it's
something like
depicted
that.
I don't-
in many old maps. During this time period, all of these amazing structures were built. It was a unified civilization with advanced technology, and they mastered the ability to have free energy for the entire
Probably
city.
I would.
And yet, history wants us to believe that people that rode around
Yeah,
in
the History
horse and
Channel is a
buggies
terrible thing that
built
has destroyed
of
us all.
this.
This theory is interesting to me because usually conspiracy theories take a known historical event or concept and twist it for their own use. And that is what's happening here. But when you look at it on the surface level,
She's
it
so
doesn't
kind.
seem
I love
like
her.
it.
High pride.
Talking about a vast steppe
like
empire.
like I said,
based
she's
in
really
northern
fascinating
China or
to listen
southeast
to.
Russia. Sure, yeah, maybe the
It's
Mongol
getting
Empire,
fish.
but
Like,
we
good
know
for
about
her.
it. But there's no indication that the Mongol Empire would have fallen just 300 years ago.
Like listening to a
So
trans
what's
woman
the
explain
deal here?
transvestigators who
To
aren't
answer that,
fundamentally
we
interested
should
in actual
start
trans
where
women,
most
just
people get drawn
accusing
into
other
the
people of
theory.
being trans is
The
really
idea of
hilarious,
ancient
actually.
empire
sure.
in Asia that you can see on old maps. So, let's talk about European cartography.
Trash.
So
Maps.
this map is funny because Sweden is in the middle of it, and you don't realize it until you look at it. Because she's from Sweden and it's a Swedish map.
Did you know
Right.
that for a significant part of human history, maps were nowhere near as accurate as they are today? Most cartographers had to rely on the words of older maps and explorers and traders and things of that nature. And as maps were made and cartographers and explorers verified older maps, the maps would be continuously refined over time. But accurate mapping oftentimes had to do with things that were important to the cartographers. Namely, knowing how big your kingdom is,
Cool.
or figuring out the most efficient way to trade. This is where the vast majority of explorers come in, because they're less exploring for the sense of adventure and more surveyors to figure out the best place to get from here to here. Because this place has bland food, this place has good food. So we took all of their spices and didn't manage to make better food anyway. So in some areas, maps could be incredibly detailed. Heavy trade routes, for example, ways in and out of ports. Maps there could be very detailed and refined. But other parts of the map were often just meh. We don't know what's there, there's probably nothing important there. These areas are often less known to cartographers, and why wouldn't they be? If there's nothing there, and there's nothing valuable coming from there, why would you spend money on an explorer to go in there and map out the area?
Right.
There's nothing there anyway.
I mean,
And
it's
so in
super
some
expensive
areas,
to do those
maps
exploration
could just
things.
be good
Yeah, I
enough.
mean, and
You didn't
sometimes
need
you would
complete
lose the whole
accuracy
ship
of
and
where
the
things
crew.
were in relation to each other. You
Yeah,
just
like
needed,
why would you go map Siberia? There's
this
nothing in
area
Siberia.
It's that area. Who gives a shit? It's an area. There's nothing there. Or I guess they would
Yeah,
say
why
with a
would
British accent. So more in the sense of like, call blimey, chaps. There's a bug over there. Call blimey, chaps. This whole region we shall call India. Yes, yes, yes. So sometimes, some areas of the map were often just good enough. Not accurate necessarily for trading or to reality, but good enough for the purposes of the map. Take, for example, the area north of Mongolia, or I guess including modern day Mongolia, this general sort of area.
She's
Kind of
basically
pen
drawing
good enough.
out
This area was rarely important for
Siberia,
European
Mongolia,
cartographers. There are not a
Kazakhstan.
ton of natural resources
like,
that Europeans could use.
that's basically
and
what's
even
there,
when
so-
it comes to Chinese and Russian conquerors, this area it's just vibes. Historically, this area has had a lot of important things going on in it, don't get me wrong. But cartographers have oftentimes just not had an interest in mapping this area out. It was simply a land of people to conquer, with no natural resources and no major trade routes.
Like there's a lot of
going through.
minerals
The
and
first
like
Western explorer to
timber
actually
there, but
try
those are
to
not
get
things you
into
want to
this
like
area,
ship from
to bring
there at the time
information
the map's
back to
made.
Europe,
Right.
was a man called Giovanni di Pian del Carpine. Mamma mia. He was on a mission from the Pope to try to figure out what's the deal with the Mongol Empire. He's on a mission to find out how many are there, how's their political structures, who's in charge, what resources, what trade do they offer, why can't I ever win over them in freaking Crusader Kings 3. Now he traveled from Rome all the way through modern day Ukraine to the edge of Mongol territory, and then onward through Mongol territory, and trying to find the emperor, the great Khan, of the Mongol Empire. In Mongol territory, he eventually meets the great Khan Göyük and tells him, hey, do you want to be Christian? And he says, no. In fact, he actually tells Giovanni eventually, hey, you should go back to Rome and tell the Pope to come over here and he can pledge his fealty to me instead. Giovanni eventually makes his way back to Europe and he compiles all the information from his exploration into a report which he calls Historia Magnolorum, the history of the Mongols. But the full title is actually Ursa Historia cum nos Tartarus Tartarus Appellamus, or History of the Mongols, which we call Tatars. Since this report, this area became cemented as being Tartar, but you can tell from the title that he didn't come up with the name Tartar. He just uses it because that's what already was used at the time. So why is that? Well, the word Tartar is actually not necessarily derived... What am I doing with this?
Yeah.
Now, the word Tartar doesn't actually relate to the modern-day ethnic group of Tatars. That's a different thing that sort of derived
So Alia
afterwards,
Mustafina is
due to
Tartar,
culture shifting
by the way.
and things happening
So they
after the fall of the Mongol Empire. It's not relevant
actual
here, actually.
ethnic group.
But the point is, we're talking about European place names, not the ethnic group. Important. Now, the word Tatar probably entered European language from either Turkic or Persian languages, from the word Tatar, meaning mounted messenger. And it was used primarily in relation to the Mongol Empire as it spread from here before Giovanni's travels onwards into Europe, becoming one of the greatest empires that the world had ever seen. And as it spread, people would oftentimes first be meted by a mounted warrior from the Mongol Empire, demanding their surrender or, complete annihilation. And because Europeans were scared shitless of the Mongol onslaught, they added the R from Tatar, which means mounted warrior, to make a reference to Tartarus, Greek hell. The idea being that the Mongol onslaughts were like hell incarnate on Earth. It's a pun.
Which, they're not
It's because
wrong.
of this pun,
By the way.
that this whole region of the world was known to European cartographers as Tartaria, the land where, the mounted warriors came from. Hell on Earth. And this isn't unique in history either. The ancient Greeks, these boys, would oftentimes refer to the entire area of Europe as Scythians. Now, the Scythians were actually a real ethnic group, but
We're
didn't survive
dissecting
for
a
super
stupid
long time.
conspiracy theory from
But that
TikTok.
doesn't matter, because any nomadic group from Europe would be called Scythians. Even though there are different languages, ethnic groups, things like
So,
that. And this isn't a
do you
rare
know
unusual
what the
phenomenon. It still
term
happens today.
barbarian
Just
comes
think
from?
of the way
No.
that we refer to the various thousands, various
So
ethnic groups and
the
languages that
Romans
exist
thought
just in
everybody north
indigenous
of them
North America.
spoke gibberish
American
that
Indians.
sounded
And to be
like
clear here,
bar, bar,
this
bar, bar to
good
them.
enough attitude around Tartar
So everybody north
is
of
only good
them who
enough
spoke
for
a language they
European
didn't understand were
cartographers.
barbarians.
The people who lived there and the people who have lived
Wow.
around that area know about the nuance. And so it's not a testament of some hidden former empire in the region. It's the evidence of European laziness. But what does all of this have to do with Great Tartaria? Well, the theory of Great Tartaria is that this was actually a vast empire. That Tartaria was not actually some sort of good enough name to just lump a bunch of people in together. It was actually the real empire. And it survives today by people looking at older European maps that do reference this as Tartary or Tartaria, as evidence in itself. But that's not where the theory actually finds its origin. In fact, the origin goes back to a man
Yeah,
called...
so none of these people on TikTok
Anatolio
looking at these old maps
Fomenko.
understand this
Now,
why
Fomenko
these
has
maps
his
are
own
labeled
theories
this
about
way.
the history of the world. He's the creator of
So this
theory
is the
known
Russian
as
conspiracy theory.
nuchronology, which I've made a video digging in a bit more detail to previously. So if you want details about that specifically, you'll have to go there. But he has ideas that the moon
That's
doesn't make
a whole
full
other
sense
set of wild
with modern day chronology,
conspiracy
and
theories.
that Russia used to dominate the entire Eurasian continent. That they would send explorers to the New World and colonize.
They don't
the
have
Ru-
a
the
shipping
Russian
tradition, right,
empires
Catherine?
Of the Maya and
They
the
do not.
Aztec.
They do not.
And that theory focuses a lot on
the new
most
chronology
of
is truly
Eurasia
wild, but
actually being
you can
a historic part
if you know
of
enough
the
about new
great
chronology, you
Russian
can see how
horde. And
this
it's an
got mutated on
ethno-nationalist
TikTok to
conspiracy theory
what it
in order
is.
to justify the Russian dominance over all of its territorial neighbors. But Tartaria
Like, imagine
is
if
not
the
about
Greeks
Russia.
used
And many
Atlantis
people
to
who believe in
justify world
Tartaria
domination.
believe that
That's what
Russia
new chronology
is
is.
a puppet state by them, or that they are, in fact, the secret controllers behind everything, that they stole the throne from Tartaria, that they took their seat, and they are now pretending to be the real rulers of Asia. And it's all based on this reference picture showing a bunch of different flags from various nations. And Tartaria does have its own flag. And this might raise some eyebrows, especially when you consider the fact that the Russian imperial flag depicts the Tartarian flag.
So do you know
within it.
what the
So,
image on the Russian flag
maybe
is?
this
So
is a sign of them hiding in plain
So
sight.
that's
And this
St.
is where we're
George
getting the
killing
origins
the
of the mud
dragon.
flood
It's
theory.
also on a
an
bunch of
offshoot
other
of
flags.
nuchronology.
It's a
Specifically created
a
by a man
legend.
called Nikolai
actually happen?
Levashov, who's a Russian occultist
No, because their dragons don't
and
exist.
spiritual healer.
But like St. George is also the
which
patron
I
saint of
I
England.
just personally love that. Now he is also a Russian propagandist, much like Fomenko, but he has even more out there theories. He lays out these theories in the book Russian History Viewed Through Distorted Mirrors. The book came out in 2007 and was actually
These are
eventually
all,
banned
like,
for reasons
creepy
that would
Russian
become obvious very
nationalists.
quickly. The book's
We're
claim
headed
a
right
fair
towards
number
this,
of
folks.
things, and is about as easy to read as you might expect from a man who seemingly
towards
wants to
this.
create the strangest theory of the world to ever exist. Take, for example, the origin of white people. As a
Any of
result of Star Wars between light and dark forces, one moon, Layla, went off its orbit, and its splinter Svarogises fell on the Earth, causing a planetary catastrophe. The tectonic plates were displaced, and Diaria sank into the Arctic Ocean. Undoubtedly, this continent did exist, and was an ancient motherland of the white race.
I would not be
Sure.
surprised if Cortina
Undoubtedly.
believes in
He also
chronology.
claims that Christianity has been forced on white people in order to delude us from the truth. It gradually did its dirty business. The descendants of the white race forgot the true concepts and traditions of millennia and had only the distorted ideas imposed by the Israelites.
It's not a
War,
conspiracy
being
theory without
financed by Judaic money,
anti-Semitism.
had become an everyday occurrence long ago. This war was a key event. It lasted for almost 4 years, from 1772 to 1775. After the Slavonic Aryan Empire, which is what he calls the Tartarian Empire, was defeated, the whole history of modern humanity was rewritten. It was completely fabricated, according to the Israelites' wishes and criteria. Oh, so typically, he's blaming the Jews. The Jews, as always, are to blame for every conspiracy theory, apparently. Now, this book is obviously complete nonsense, but it demonstrates a clear similarity with the overall theory of Tartaria, but with some differences. He claims that Russia defeated Tartaria in a war, which is definitely part of the modern Tartaria theory, but he makes no mention of mud floods. He mentions that Russia did topple the ancient empire,
So,
but makes
this
no
is
mention
kind of,
to them having advanced architecture
plagiarizing
or
the
free
Atlantis
energy
myth, because
generators.
in the
He
Atlantis
actually
myth,
talks a lot
Athens
more about
destroyed
Stargate,
Atlantis.
which isn't part of the theory, but I really wish it would have been. So what the modern theory ends up being is a muddled and mixed version of Levashov's version of nuchronology, with elements that Levashov attributes to specific events and peoples being applied to possibly everything. But this is where we start to separate the theory more and more from its Russian roots. And today, Tartaria believers are basically not at all aligned with Russia or Russian interests, or believing that Russia is supposedly this ancient
This
empire.
is when your
And one person that I
misinformation
think
goes
has
feral.
exemplified this split from Russia is a man called David Ewing Jr. And he's written a bunch of books about Tartaria, but my favorite is his one about Tartaria and transvestigation, arguing that the ancient world was more advanced, and perhaps the people who have brought down this ancient empire is secret trans people.
Right.
More on that in my last video, I guess. But the majority of the focus in David's books has to do with architecture. A big focus for Tartaria believers deals with submerged buildings, or world fairs, because they depict extraordinary buildings that just aren't around anymore. World fairs are actually very common points of argument within the community, as are star forts, with the claim that the ancient peoples just couldn't have made such symmetrical structures by themselves. But when you lay it all out in front of you, like David does in his books, it all just devolves into a pseudoscientific nonsense fest with absolutely no justification whatsoever. For example, a big question researchers asked was, the Easter Island heads, the statues are buried. What happened? How did they get buried? Which researchers? There are many photos showing work being done at Stonehenge. Researchers showed these photos as clear evidence that Stonehenge was built recently. David, you know not everything in a single picture is the same age, right? I also love that these pictures aren't even screenshots. He just took pictures of them with his phone on his monitor and just put them in a book. Like, fuck it, it'll do, I guess. But while David is funny, his focus on architecture is something that's shared by many within the Tartaria community. The overwhelming amount of evidence are images of old buildings or sometimes entire cities looking weird. A common refrain within the community are people being confused over how people who rode horse and buggies could have built things like cathedrals.
We were told that these were built by people that rode in horse and buggies.
Similar confusion exists over cities that look empty or where shacks would be pictured next to huge skyscrapers. The contrast of technology and wealth are just too much for some people to make sense of in their minds.
And I know what you're gonna say. Oh, they were poor. They couldn't afford to build stuff like that for themselves. Yet, look at this neighborhood. They couldn't build this for themselves. These are some pretty damn nice houses. I just refuse to believe that these people built this.
These are all aesthetic issues, and that is as deep as most believers will admit to being. And unless you examine it, you might actually agree. So, let's actually examine it.
Yeah, so this is why do our buildings look shitty and these buildings look nice.
As always, everything is political, everything political is online, and everything online is Marxist economics. Ignoring any evidence, which is quite easy for a lot of these people to do, you actually do see a deep frustration with how our society is organized. We have multi-billionaires running around at the same time as homeless people exist. So something's wrong. They notice, they see this as a flaw in how our society is structured. And they correctly also see that the reason why it's structured like this is because society is ruled by the people who have the most money.
Right.
But to them, that doesn't make sense. There's no natural evolution for how we got there and how it has ended up to our cities becoming blocky Minecraft cubes with no visual aesthetic of themselves. And critically, they don't see how our society today was formed into the way that it is. It displays a misunderstanding of history that goes beyond the aesthetic, even though that is where it often ends up for them. The focus on aesthetics and architecture is only really symbolic. The real concern is a frustration with society in which we live. But many of the people don't have the tools or words or knowledge required to sort of understand why this has happened. You can enroll some of these people in a history
these people
course
are
and you
seeing
can
a
tell them
problem, they're just not don't have the tools
money
to
accumulates over time.
understand
and
the problem they're
toppling
seeing.
of the aristocracy leads to the establishment of a bourgeois class, but most people never reach that level.
Like,
Most
people who don't
just
have an
look
education
at how
aren't
things
dumb.
appeared in
That's
history
really important to
and how
know.
they appear today. But not
They just
only
don't
is
have
it
the
a reflection
tools
of
to
our
like
modern day
know what they're
concerns around cities,
seeing
I
and
think it's also
like
a
articulate
reflection
a
of how we
policy
think
position.
about the climate right now. A major part of the theory has to do with the free energy, with the technological advancement. And some people argue that, well, we've had an industrial revolution for quite a long time. Humanity has been here for such a long time. How come we still haven't figured out how to take care of the planet? The only explanation that some people have is that, well, they are forcing us to live in a system where we have to pay for power. Back in the day, they argue, we could produce infinite free energy, clean energy that we could harvest from the ether. And I get why that's something that you would want to strive for and idealize, especially with recent events causing, gas prices to go up way higher than people are used to, causing electric bills to become way more expensive than most people can actually handle. I mean, who wouldn't want to fantasize about free energy generators that you could just stick on your roof?
Right.
Any ornate roof ornament is going to be assumed to be some sort of energy generator. Cathedrals are especially subject to this because they have a lot of roof ornaments, and, well, I'll just let TikTok take the lead on this one too.
A cavity magnetron is a high-powered vacuum tube that generates microwaves using the interaction of a stream of ions with a magnetic field while in the cavity resonator. Can you see the resemblance? These structures were never intended to hold glass within them.
But all of this is just vague science words smushed together. They never explain why it would generate energy, just that cavity magnetrons generate energy.
Now, if you haven't heard of cymatics, it's basically the study of sound and frequency waves in their visible form. I just find it extremely coincidental that a lot, if not all of these buildings have structures that represent certain frequencies in their visible form. And didn't a lot of these buildings have bells in them?
Bells? Yeah, but
I've
what
heard
do
of this.
bells have to do with anything?
All
Yeah,
around
like-
the world, we see the
and
remnants of
bells.
our ancestors hiding in plain sight.
Ring bells to heal
These
you and
buildings
shit.
look more like a fairy tale than real life. And most
mean,
are long
some of this is,
destroyed,
like,
only remembered in
Connecting
pictures.
things that you're like, those aren't connected.
Yeah.
And this is where they turn to the evidence regarding petrochemical billionaires.
I'm yawning so much. I
because
don't
they
know.
argue that climate change
I'm
is
sorry.
a result
No, you're
of
good. That's
the
not your
fall
fault.
of Tartaria. Because we don't have this free energy anymore. That's
The-
why the
things
world
are-
is becoming as bad as it is. So
I mean,
they look to
I
history and
find
they
this
see
fascinating just
that
because
a lot of petrochemical
it's a
billionaires
new.
and
It's like a
companies
myth that
and
was born in the
climate
last 10
scientists
years.
It's
sponsored
wild,
by
like,
petrochemical
what?
billionaires have done an
I-
active
I-
effort to hide.
Seen a couple videos on it, but I've never gone
research
this deep into it. So I'm
into
just like,
climate
this is
change.
crazy at
All
this
companies
point.
themselves
Yeah,
have known
so
about climate
the
change
other
since
video
the 50s
I
and
don't want us
60s.
to watch all of, but I
climate
want us to
change
watch
is a
some of
concept that has
is
been
a
known to
guy
scientists
debunking
since
a bunch of their evidence.
1900. And if you really view the world through a purely technological lens, this doesn't make any
But I
sense.
think she gives a
Especially since
better
there
like
are clean
explanation
energy
of
alternatives,
what this
and
is.
there are ways to
Yeah,
fix climate change.
Tasty's right.
But because we don't,
I feel like it's very common for
they
conspiracy theories to have connections
are
with no further
doing
exists or
it.
events.
And you can see this frustration when people talk about the vast amounts of wealth
And then,
coming from
as you
oil
said,
and coal. Sure, we can build
It remains
great
sad
cities
to me
and
that
great
people can
monuments
look at
to
rose windows and
ourselves,
see machines
but
rather
they
than
don't
beauty.
really compare to that
And a
built
bunch
in
of the building
past.
tours from Chicago World's Fair
And
got
the
just
world
rolled
is
into
getting
interior walls
worse
of other buildings that
still.
were built at the fair.
How come everything in the past
Also, like,
appears as a golden age,
Particularly in the World's
but
Fair
today,
stuff,
with more
people see
technology
these
than
pictures
ever,
of grand buildings
it's a
and they don't
dystopia.
realize that they were
These
like
buildings were
sets.
used for
facades.
harnessing the ether
Yeah.
and
They
converting
weren't,
it to
like,
free energy. Their boats
intended to
free
be
energy.
lasting
The
buildings,
columns
so
were
they were built
electric,
incredibly
and the
cheaply.
cathedral
Yeah, they're like
domes and
sets.
towers were power
Yes.
stations for transmission of clean,
They were exactly
free,
sets.
and wireless energy. Later on,
Like that
parasites put
moving
crosses
walkway,
and
like
other
that was
religious
the feat of
symbols to conceal the
insanity. But
original
like
purpose.
they did it, but it wasn't there forever.
Now, one big reason for why things look aesthetically different is because
And it couldn't have
there
been.
have been
No.
different
Like,
priorities across
The
history
materials
for how
used
we
to
build
build it
buildings,
weren't there to
and
last.
also a great deal of survivor bias. We today don't see the myriad of shacks and sheds that most people would build in and live in. We only see the great spires and monuments that they built, that they dedicated specific energy into to becoming aesthetically pleasing. And that's one reason. But it still doesn't answer the question of why we aren't building ornate structures like that today. Where are the great cathedrals? And where are the great structures of stone? And this is where economics comes in. Because construction has changed radically, specifically on its return on investment. I don't know why anyone watches my videos. I welcome 100,000 people to me talking about concrete economics. Construction as an industry has been around since civilization. And for most of human history, there have been two rules around construction. Construction material is expensive, but labor is cheap. Labor has historically been cheap because you didn't oftentimes need to pay anyone above subsistence wage. As in, you give someone a piece of bread and then they work for a few days. It's pretty cheap to maintain that, especially if you're a rich person who wants to commission a grand cathedral in your name or something like that. Conversely, construction material is expensive. It demands a lot of technology to extract and refine and to transport. Things that aren't very easy before the invention of trucks. And so the thing that people in the past would dedicate their time to was refining those construction materials as finely as possible in order to extract the maximum return of investment. And this was worth it for a lot of investors.
Yeah,
because
so
they
you
would
build
get a
a
high
building
return
to
on
last
investment
in the
without
past
investing too
because
much into
it
the
was
cost of
really
labor of
expensive
actually
to make those
refining
materials.
that material.
Right.
But since the Industrial Revolution, two things have happened. One, new technologies have made it so that construction materials are a lot cheaper. We have concrete, we have trucks that move gravel around, we have steel that you can easily build high structures with. But conversely, labor has become more expensive. Workers now need living wages, housing, safety equipment, training. Those things cost money. And suddenly, the cost of labor and actually investing time into a building becomes more costly and less worth it. Suddenly, you're not going to pay construction workers to refine the terracotta on a building when you can just put up a concrete wall. And this shift in economics has actually exacerbated that survivorship bias because a lot of older buildings were built to basically last forever in order to maximize the return on investment on that construction material. But today, buildings are built to last a little bit until they made their money back, and then you can tear them down and just build up a new one. This is what happened to the Singer building, which despite its beauty and style and alleged energy generator just wasn't making enough money compared to other skyscrapers, like One Liberty Plaza. It's also what happened with world fairs. Buildings were built very beautifully and very quickly, but that meant that the quality of the construction was dog shit in order to keep costs down. And they had to be temporary constructions. So this is why cities look the way that they do. But you can explain this to a lot of believers in this theory and they're not going to listen to you. A lot of people who believe in this are not actually tradesmen themselves. They're not construction workers, they're not architects, they're opinion havers on Reddit, which is a fine thing to be. But they're not oftentimes invested in how cities are actually built. But even if you explain this to someone,
if you've ever built something with a hammer and a chisel, you don't question that you can build these things with a hammer and chisel.
Some people still won't believe you because they have evidence. So let's dig into that evidence. The number one example that people will bring up is the revealing of cities underneath the ground, which I've mentioned previously in this video. And they will demonstrate pictures like this, which can look pretty convincing on first glance. That looks like windows and doors underneath ground level, several stories, and why would anyone actually build that? But the thing is, they're not actually windows and doors, they just look like they are. These are foundations or fundaments that people will build underneath buildings so that they don't move around. Those
things that look like windows and doors are actually spaces for things like sewer pipes to come in and out of.
The building will stand for a long time, but most people never see a foundation. And if you don't know anything about foundations, odds are you might just think of foundations as a big concrete block that you put in the ground. Like Minecraft.
Yeah. Like a Minecraft foundation Like,
needs to
you can't do that in the middle of the city because there's too much,
for lack
like,
of a better term.
shit that
Because
has
you
to
need
go
put in
through
cables, you need
those
to put in
spaces.
pipes, plumbing, sewers, all sorts of things need to go through that thing. Sometimes they can be underneath the foundations, and that's fine, but oftentimes they're just in the foundations themselves. So pictures like this don't actually make that much sense. But then they show pictures like this. But these aren't foundations, these aren't fundaments. These are actually former ground floors. These are actually windows, and that's true. And this brings us to actual flooding. Floodings that have actually happened. I don't know if you actually know this, but many cities throughout the world are located near water. Sometimes that water goes up, as in times during storms or other events.
The oldest buildings in Chicago have
Water
a
go
mine
up
cart
events.
tunnels
This
where they
causes
would get
flooding.
gold deliveries.
The water goes through the streets and damages property and housing. And it's not good. People generally don't want flooding, and it's a problem that's getting worse in the modern day. Now, there are a few ways to fix flooding.
Mitigate it.
One of them is to fix climate change and to stabilize the entire Earth.
Imagine that.
Not gonna happen.
No.
The other method is to build flood walls or dikes or other types of walls against the water. But this can actually be not practical in a lot of situations. Sometimes a dike is going to leak a lot and is going to be a present danger for a long time in case the dike breaks. Not good. Sometimes the ground might not be stable enough for a wall. So, okay, sucks, I guess. I guess we have to deal with flooding. Unless you go for method number 3, which is simply to raise the entire ground level upwards. Water doesn't flow upwards, so you can outsmart the water. And this is something that a lot of cities have actually intentionally done. They've buried entire streets, sometimes up to 3
Yeah,
floors
so Seattle is often
just to
like
intentionally
cited in this
raise
theory,
the ground
and that's
level
what's happened
so
in
that
Seattle.
when
Right.
there is a flood,
There's a story
the
about
water
workers
isn't going to flow
accidentally
there.
punching a hole
A lot of
in
cities have done
the
this
tunnel
in
and all
like
these
more or
buildings
less
flooded
severity,
because they're on
but
the river.
the one that
Workers
a lot of
were
people will
hauling
send pictures
vast
of
stuff
is a
yesterday,
place in
so maybe
Seattle,
fast and people
because
not
Seattle
collapse.
did that, and now they're hosting tours in the ruins underneath the ground, with skylights where the new ground level is. And on the
Yeah,
new
so
ground
this is
level,
Seattle.
you have, you know, roads, pedestrian streets, signs, you know, normal ground level shit. And this isn't something new. This is something that ancient peoples also did in their ancient cities, which sometimes will lead to archaeological digs in modern cities built in old cities, discovering former bottom floors that are actually just buried and forgotten about intentionally hundreds of years ago. And when this doesn't happen, sometimes there are actual mud floods. The river Tiber in Italy has regularly flooded and caused
Tiber
a
is
lot
what
of
goes through
cities to
Rome.
be buried under a fair amount of ground, essentially. But these floods wouldn't happen to the level of covering entire civilizations. It would cover up a part of the town. And what would happen is people would simply rebuild their town on top of the ruins of their old town. Because, of course, it's practical. Which again leads to a similar phenomenon where you dig underground and you find a new town.
Also, like, if
None
a
of this is
volcano
evidence of a
destroys a
mud flood,
city,
but it's simply
it
evidence of
will
how
leave all
cities
of this
are built
very
and maintained.
good
But the thing is,
farming
these
soil on
things
top
don't
of
really
the city.
happen today.
So you have people
don't
who will
really
still move
raise
into
the
a place
ground
that
levels of
has
their
been
cities
destroyed by a
or
volcano
build
because
on
it's so
top
good
of
for farming.
ruins when a mud flood comes through. Because we've gotten better at
So, like,
protecting our cities.
one
and
of the
where we
best places in
live.
the
When
world
people
to
think
grow
flood control, they think
tomatoes
of dams,
is on
and they
Mount
don't think things that might actually
Vesuvius,
explain what's
where
going on.
Pompeii was
In
destroyed.
addition to this, they also talk about
And
domes as being
thing is, like,
Tartarian architecture.
What's
saying
funny about
that
Pompeii
because
is that
a
I
type
was
of
under the
ringed
impression
dome
that
is common
the
in a lot of
skeletons were
different
just
places
there, and
around
those
the
skeletons
world,
are there
built
just
by
actually
different
plaster,
people.
right?
This is a sign that
Yeah,
the
so,
same people actually
what
built all of
happened
them.
is that
It is
they found these
unrealistic
voids
for
in the
people to
ground,
have come up with the exact
and so
same
they decided to see
style
what
of
they were, and they
domes
say
in many
poured
different
plaster
areas of
into
the
them,
world.
and then they
Which
would
again
dig
kind of
out the ground
betrays the
around the
lack of
plaster,
awareness and
and it was
skill that these
people.
people actually have
So
when analyzing
it's more
their
like these were
theory.
people-shaped
A lot of
holes
the
in the
time
ground.
it's down to economics or mathematics, and that's kind of easy for most people to figure out. The most egregious example of this are probably Tartaria hardcore believers who believe that pyramids all over the world were built by the same people, because why are there pyramids everywhere? I mean, the simple explanation is that that's how you build a building that stands around for a long time. Anyone who's ever played with blocks as a child can figure that out. You don't need advanced technology to figure that out, bucko. And all of this sounds like pretty reasonable answers to the evidence that is purported by the theorists. Except for some. Take, for example, some of the evidence that they use that doesn't have to do with images, such as CIA documents and other real examples of falsifications of history. One piece of evidence that they often use comes from the CIA, but it's actually a report of something that the Soviets were doing in their homeland during the Cold War. So this document deals with that falsification of history, and it mentions Tartaria by name. So it says,
like, for example,
or let us take the matter of history, which, along with religion, language, and literature, constitute the core of a people's cultural heritage. Here again, the communists have interfered in a shameless manner. For example, on August 9th, 1944, the Central Committee of the Communist Party, sitting in Moscow, issued a directive ordering the party's Tartar Provincial Committee to proceed to a scientific revision of the history of Tartaria, to liquidate serious shortcomings and mistakes of a nationalistic character committed by individual writers and
so the
historians
Soviets did this
in
with, like,
dealing with Tartar history.
almost all of their non-Russian ethnic
In other
groups.
words, Tartar history was to be rewritten. Let us be frank,
So they,
was
like,
to be
found
falsified in order to eliminate
a
references
discussion
to
of this
great
that
Russian
has to do with
aggressions
the
and to
Tartar
hide
people.
the fact of the real course of Tartar-Russian relations. And this was no isolated case. In every Muslim area within the USSR, historians on orders
By
of
the
the
way,
Communist Party
Putin's saying
have
that
rewritten
Ukrainians
history
are
to
Russians is
distort the
part of this
facts
too.
so that the Russians appear always in a good light. This document, you will understand, isn't actually about
to say that
Tartaria,
Ukrainians
the
are
empire,
Russian, you
but
have to erase all of
Tartaria,
Ukrainian history.
the generic name for a complete geographic area and ethnic group. Just like medieval cartographers, the Soviets and the CIA, probably more specifically, are using generic terms for a generic area because they're lazy. But if you don't know the history of the word Tartar, it seems kind of obvious, right? It all fits into the general mold of the theory as it stands anyway. And this is a point where a lot of believers will point out that, well, it makes sense if you only read it within the context of everything else also making sense. Which is how a conspiracy theory works. It
how,
is upholding
like,
itself.
calling
But
everything
all of
Tartaria
this is
here
mostly
is
just
like
set dressing
calling
for
Native Americans
an ideological
Indians.
phenomenon that is a bit more insidious and that has some political connotations with real-world consequences. And that is a phenomenon that's called aesthetic moralism. Aesthetic moralism is the idea that some aesthetics, especially in architecture, are more inherently good than other styles of architecture. Sometimes this depends on the way that you value good. If you're talking about pure value,
so
some
if
people
your
will
city
value
is pretty,
brutalism
your
more than
society
others.
is more moral.
Some people on the left will sometimes do this, where they see brutalist architecture being built very cheaply, and they will see that as having the maximum utilitarian value. And therefore, it is good because you can solve the housing crisis by building a lot of blocks, very in Soviet style, which is fine, but a lot of people will base the value not on utilitarian value, but rather on moral good. It's just better this way. Obsession around architecture is something that isn't actually uncommon, especially when it comes to right-wing political movements. Architectural styles can act as a shorthand for how things appear to be going. If a city is ugly, you know, it's not going to go well for it. But if a city is pretty, then you know you've reached success. A lot of extremist right-wing ideologies have had a fascination and obsession with architecture for that specific reason. But the aesthetics also support the ideology at play. To be fair, it's not just right-wing ideologies that do this, but right-wing ideologies do have an obsession with the past. But there is such a thing as left-wing architecture as well, building more modern and innovative buildings that don't look at all like the buildings of the past. Both of them symbolize a message to put forward. A clear example of this happens in the 1937 World Fair in Paris that displays both the national pavilions of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. The Soviet Union pavilion displays the classical union of workers and peasants, but the Nazi pavilion is built to symbolize Nazi Germany as a bulwark against communism. Purely via architectural style, the political ideas of both nations are represented. And I think that this obsession with architecture displays the ideological underpinnings of Tartaria as well. Because when asked who is to blame
These
for
buildings
all
are both
of
wood, by the
society's
way.
ills,
Yeah.
oftentimes the people pointed out will be generalized parasites or the Jews, both theories that are extremely congruent with 20th century fascist theory. And that's not surprising considering that these ideas originate with Levashov's work that is extremely far-right, bordering on Nazi occultism. And this is where the danger comes in with Tartaria. Tartaria is strange, because on one hand, these people do desperately want to return to the great empire, but they also are frustrated with the way that modern-day politics works. And this points, I think, to the most fundamental core of their ideology. It's not necessarily a right-wing or a left-wing frustration with the world, although there are some people who, of course, do subscribe to those ideologies here as well. But I don't think Tartaria is inherently either one. Rather, I think that the believers of Tartaria want an alternative. They see historical architecture as maybe being preferable, but at the same time, not all historical buildings are acceptable, only the more spectacular ones. They want to return to that idyllic past, but they want to return to the outrageous idyllic past. So while a lot of aspects of this ideology are right-wing focused, it's also a frustration with the modern right wing. They don't believe that the modern right wing has the solutions available to fix the problems. They don't look up to Russia, they do not look up to people like Donald Trump, because they are simply puppets of them. Many will sometimes speculate around the Mongol Empire, thinking that it may have been Tartaria, but only if Genghis Khan was a blonde white man. Or sometimes arguing that the giants that ruled Tartaria are our white ancestors. And I'm 2 meters tall, but I'm not that tall. And this is where I think the frustration with modern day right-wing ideology comes in. Because they don't only want to rebuild the past, they want to make an entirely new past that is better than anything that has existed before. They want to return to an empire that no longer exists. And to do that, they need to build it anew. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the end of the video. I want to quickly mention my sponsor for this video, Curiosity Stream. You know Curiosity Stream. They are the people who keep sponsoring my videos, even
if you
though I'm
want to
really
see
bad at meeting their
like
deadlines.
just some like nitty-gritty historian guy debunks their evidence, we don't have to watch all of this video, but I think it's worth seeing like
if you're interested in
20 minutes or so of it.
Conspiracy theories and myths and things of that
So
nature,
start
I
this
highly
next
recommend
video
the,
at
I forgot what it's called.
141.
Secret Society.
And all that happened is Mind Unveiled got confused by the
141?
perspective created by the
141.
photographer's position in relation to the building he was
So
photographing.
this
The
is
second
a
appearance of that video.
medievalist,
Historian can
but
sit
also
here and
like
knock off
He's a
every single
cutie.
one of these points rather effortlessly. It wasn't that
he's an
it took
interesting
me a long
figure.
time to
I don't
disprove any of
necessarily
this stuff.
recommend
It
his
was
whole
that
channel
there
the way I
was so
do
much
hers,
nonsense per 10
but
seconds
this is
of
good.
video that I had
And
to
I'm not
spend
hearing anything.
hours per
Oh, shit.
minute of video researching just to debunk
There
how
you go.
many lies were told. It wasn't that they were difficult lies. It's just the sheer number of them is
Yeah, so
astonishing.
he's
the
gonna
truth
go
is, I
through
don't know whether
like
Mind Unveiled
the
is a grifter. I don't know whether all of these
he's going
big
through one of
Tartaria
like the
channels
main
are
quote
just
unquote
doing it for
thinkers of
money
this
to trick
movement
stupid people
and
into believing them.
showing
But whatever they're doing, it's
how
not
he doesn't
good.
know what
It's
he's
a
talking about.
problem, and it probably should be confronted by the people educated enough to do it. And of course, like I said, there is an entire first half of that video that goes over a bunch of other evidence, and trust me, we will be doing a video on that as well.
Now, I had not thought about the fact that he's very much your type.
Very much so. You could get it.
This is part 2, and I would recommend going back and
Yeah.
watching part 1
So
first.
I mean, the whole video is
way,
good, but
in
it's
case
like
you haven't,
too
here's
long.
a quick recap. In a video a couple of weeks ago, we covered
This
specifically the
worries
channel
me,
Mind
though.
Unveiled's version of
What?
Tartaria, what that means,
The cross he's
what it
wearing.
is, who the
Oh, and he's
Tartarians
a
were
Celtic
supposedly,
historian.
and basically all
Oh,
of his
so I just want
evidence
to touch
for
him.
it, at least from half of the video. We covered
So it's
30
a,
minutes
like,
of an
Celtic
hour-long
cross.
video in that because it was that dense.
Um,
As for why we
like,
chose Mind Unveiled's
Irish
channel,
history is
I will
his thing.
reiterate this despite the fact that
touch
he
him.
leaves it out of his response video. But we chose Mind Unveiled because we asked the Tartaria community who they thought did a good summary. Someone that we could just take one video and go through
Yeah,
the
so he
points in
did a
that and handle
debunk
it
on
that
this
way
guy.
without going through every video on the channel.
So he
And
asked
the most
the
popular
community
result was
who would
Mind
be a good
Unveiled,
video to
whose
watch
Reddit
to
account
understand his theory.
constantly is
They
posting
gave him a
videos
name.
of Mind Unveiled's
He did a
channel
debunk
to
on
that
it,
exact
and then
subreddit.
immediately
So I
the
felt,
community's
that
response
makes
is, "Well,
sense.
he's crazy."
Also, in his summary video, he uses a stream from Charlie, Moist Critical, that I appear in, so it just kind of made sense. To briefly respond to something that was said in Mind Unveiled's response video, I did not choose your video because I was salty that Charlie didn't choose my 59-second short to understand what Tartaria is. And speaking of that last video, I want to address some things because this turned into drama and I really didn't expect it to. Many people in the comments accused me of picking the most insane possible YouTuber on this subject. That was both on Reddit and here on YouTube. I just explained why I picked Mind Unveiled, and I've been looking into other people like Robert Seffer, who people seem to have a much higher opinion of. So I'll be looking at that as well, because apparently Mind Unveiled is out there and fringe. I was also accused of not doing my own research. I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean, but I have the notepad right here, and I promise you Aiden's not doing the research. He has another day job. But to prove that I do in fact have all 88 pages of handwritten notes, I'm going to post the scans publicly on Patreon, so you'll be able to see it without subscribing. There was also a point made about how this theory tends to lean into anti-Semitism in some cases, and that Mind Unveiled does use a couple of those points. Now, people claimed that I was accusing him of anti-Semitism without the appropriate evidence, so I'm going to leave that out of this video so people can focus on, you know, all of the points I'm debunking and not the notion that this may be a little racist. I'll say I am willing to give him the benefit of the doubt that he himself does not hold anti-Semitic viewpoints, but the theory does go
a lot of conspiracy theories pick up anti-Semitic stuff, and they just don't examine it.
Sources that are pretty rough. One example of this would be that Michael Sarian, somebody he cites quite often, says basically that World War II is misunderstood and that the Germans weren't necessarily the bad guys in the way that we think, which, Also, because it has been publicly commented now, and I do have receipts, when I did ask him publicly about his opinion on the Holocaust, he said that he needed to do more research and they had never done a video on it, so he didn't know. And to be abundantly clear, I have reached out to him privately to clarify his position, and he has since refused. And a few people said that I was condescending in that video, and I will admit that there were a few moments where I
And he's going to be condescending in this one too.
Arrogant. That said, most of the people saying that I was condescending or arrogant didn't actually watch my video and just watched Mind Unveiled's version of it and admitted to that. But I do know that I have in my life had a tendency towards, you know, arrogance and a big ego, and I have worked to remove that from my personality to the best of my ability, but sometimes it does come out. And when somebody claims that the nations of the Holy Roman Empire represented on the coat of arms are actually Phoenician families planted there by the Catholics, including England, despite the fact that England was Protestant and is not on the coat of arms, it's hard to not be condescending. Additionally, there was this was kind of an in-kind response to how his video was done, and there are a few quotes in here where I'll point out exactly when he said something that came across to me as a little smarmy. Two of those particular comments that I covered in the last video were one where he's basically like, come on guys, we don't really believe that Ben Franklin did that thing with the key, right? All because Franklin was a Mason. Not anything to do with the possibility that the story is apocryphal, it's just that because he was a Mason. The other one is when he's like, come on guys, do you really think that people could build star forts like this on sand in only 1800? And it's like, yeah, sand is actually pretty shallow to the bedrock, and they removed the sand and then built a lumber foundation and then built the fort on top of that. So there's some condescension in his video as well. I just wanted to make that clear. So not saying that I'm a saint or perfect, but just saying that
Yes,
he's
you are.
not in
You're
a position to
perfect.
talk. So with the criticisms from my last video and my explanation for how I feel about them out of the way, let's actually get into the definition of Tartaria and how Mind Unveiled seems to argue that history works. So according to Mind Unveiled on their channel, I've realized this is actually 2 people now, but according to their channel, this is the largest conspiracy, that's his word by the way, conspiracy in the world. Perhaps even larger than Flat Earth, which by the way, his Reddit suggests he believes in as well.
Oh,
and he
Lord.
claims that this whole theory begins with all of our taught history being a lie. Now, there's an immediate problem.
Yeah,
which
if you
is
don't
that
believe
history
history
at the
is real,
professional
you don't
level
believe
is not
science is real
taught,
either.
It is
Right.
studied. We take documents, artifacts, we talk with anthropologists and archaeologists, linguists, geneticists, all sorts of different groups, and the goal is to, using the evidence available, construct a coherent narrative for what happened in history. And I'm not saying fake a narrative, I'm saying actually present what we believe happened based on the available evidence. So it's studied in that historians ask a question, gather evidence, take notes, analyze, discuss, publish their work, and then it is reviewed by other historians.
Right.
So in no way is it that at the professional level, historians are just reading a textbook. And then we've got to address his definition for Tartaria, because it's not what you might expect. When you hear somebody say Tartaria, you might think that they're talking about a specific landmass and its history. The term, according to Mind Unveiled, is a little bit more broad than that. And it goes as follows. The phenomena or category of alternative history that delves into the research of lost history and civilizations, hijacks and stolen buildings, magic, alchemy, and cloning, antiquitech, cataclysms, mudfloods, buried buildings, star forts and fortified cities, royal bloodlines and secret brotherhoods, asylums, orphans and oddfellows, underground tunnels and waste management, and suppressed Moorish history. Mind Unveiled, I will give him credit, he does say that there are surely some truths sprinkled in, and I would argue that there's more than some, and he very, very much overestimates the lies. Additionally, I find it very interesting that this is all constructed around the Catholic Church lying to people, and yet he never once mentions the donation of Constantine, which is probably the most famous lie ever told by the Catholic Church. We'll get to the exact details of what the donation of Constantine was and what it was used for later, but it's very odd that something so obvious was not mentioned. And it's odd that it wasn't mentioned despite the fact that it's in Sarian's book. Like, I bought it. I bought actually all of the
I
books
can't
that he
speak to
used.
some of this
But let's
because
start with
he's
the
a
fabricated history and
a
stolen
medievalist
city.
and
I
I
will
am a
say
modernist.
at times this does kind of veer out of the
So
original
I
topic
did not
that I
study the
chose,
same kind
because
of
the way
history
that his
he did.
video works, it doesn't always remain on the exact topic.
Well,
But he says what Tartaria boils down
it's
to is fabricated
Constantine's
history
whatever the fuck.
and stolen cities. Then he
If
suggests
I
that
remember
New York,
correctly, it's
Chicago,
about
Philadelphia, Charleston, Tampa, all of
giving
these
authority
different
to the
major
Catholic
US
Church
cities
over the
were all
Western Roman
actually built
Empire.
by the Tartarians and were already here when the European colonists arrived. He's claiming that these buildings are being recycled, that they were already there and dug out of the mud after the mud flood, which, yes, we'll get to the mud flood too. Now, as far as the actual building examples he gives for talking about this, we did cover that in the last video. So on screen right now, you should see the photos from the last video that we were talking about. All of these have perfectly reasonable explanations. Nobody was digging a building out of the ground. At about 3 minutes 11 seconds in this video, however, he shows us the Rua del Setembro in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And once again, he uses a very blurry, low-resolution version of the image, despite the fact that high-resolution ones are very, very, very much available on the internet. This is something he actually does on numerous occasions throughout the videos. He shows a very, very low-quality image.
And a lot of like
suggests
TikTok
that,
conspiracy
that's the
people
only
do
version we
this.
have. In the photo, he has what appears to be a utility pole circled in red, as well as the spire from an adjacent building across the street, and looking at it, it does look like there's no wires attached to the utility pole, but that's just because of the quality of the photography. We're going to be talking about a photo later in this very video where it's taken a little bit closer to the utility pole, and you can see the lines, but they're very faint, so it's very possible that the reason there's no lines attached to that utility pole is just that the camera wasn't of a high enough quality to capture it.
Yeah,
But
none of
because
these
there
people
are no
know anything
wires,
about
he
the history
claims
of
that it is
photography.
collecting atmospheric energy. At 3:35, he shows a photo that the website Piercing the Veil of Illusion has labeled as Charlotte, North Carolina,
fireworks
and it's
starting.
being excavated. This is a problem because the picture is actually of Marseille, France. It was taken by an Adolphe Thierry during expansions and renovations of the city in 1863, and I was told
So
I
of
don't
course
do my
this
own
looks like
research. But
Europe
this
because
photograph
it
is
is
not of
Europe.
North Carolina. It's not even in America. It is France.
Yeah, the
Do you
fireworks
know
starting.
how much pain I'm in having to use France
Yeah,
for
I've
my argument?
gotten a couple
Next,
of
he
fireworks
shows us the
already.
Oriental Hotel in Dunedin, which is in New Zealand, not the United States. Just from looking at the picture, it's pretty clear that what happened was they dug into the hillside to build this building, and that it was not dug out of the mud. This is partially because it was a lumber structure that actually caught on fire 4 different times before they finally decided to demolish it because it was a fire hazard that could have burned down the entire town. According to Mind Unveiled, all of this old world architecture seems to be made out of stone. And as I said, it was only standing for like 20 years. It was built in 1863 and demolished in 1887. But then we move on to an example
Yeah,
that's
so
not
like
just a background
as soon as
photo,
he
it's
starts
something
looking
he
into the
actually talks about.
pictures that
And
this
that,
guy
of
is
course,
using,
is Tampa Bay, or
like
the city of Tampa.
they're not
The
the
first thing he
pictures that
mentions is that there
it
are
says. So when you
tunnels
see it like
underneath
TikTok
most major
conspiracy
U.S.
theory,
cities,
don't
and in this case
assume the
was talking
pictures they're
specifically
showing
about
you
the
are
Ebro
what they say
Tunnel
they are.
underneath Tampa. Now, those tunnels aren't really that much of a mystery to historians, as he claims that they are, and he says that historians claim they were prohibition tunnels meant to smuggle alcohol, but the article he has on screen as support for this entire thing very, very clearly says that historians think they were sewers. Now, in that article, it does say that it's entirely possible that people did use these tunnels to smuggle alcohol, but it seems pretty clear that these were sewer tunnels. So his whole mainstream historians are all lying to you thing doesn't really work here because mainstream historians aren't saying the things he's claiming they are. And according to the article, those tunnels were built in the 1880s, and if they were built in the 1880s, it makes complete sense that they would have been new sewers, because we were just starting to build industrial urban sewers at that time. Additionally, newer pipes are down there that were installed as late as the 70s or 80s. So, either the city misplaced records
Yeah,
about
so
the
if you have
construction
a
of the
sewer
tunnels,
tunnel
or
built in the
Tartaria
19th
was still in
century,
existence
you're
well
not
into
going to
Reagan's
like
presidency.
make a
That's what
new
it was. Reagan
tunnel
destroyed
to
Tartaria.
put your
He goes
modern
on to say
pipes
that
through.
some of these
You
tunnels
just
are
lay the
massive
modern
and
pipes
couldn't be
through the
built
old tunnel.
using the technology of the time, but he does not go on to explain what that means or why they couldn't be built using the technology of the time. He does use an image of the Union Canal Tunnel, which is not that far from us, over in, just central Pennsylvania, and it's really not all that impressive up
Jesus,
close.
Pennsylvania
They
is so
basically
far away.
dug a ditch and then dug some tunnels through hills and mountains.
Yeah, so
That's
he's
it.
from like
Nothing too
central
impressive. Also,
Pennsylvania.
the rock that they had to dig through to make
shame.
this tunnel was primarily slate, which breaks extraordinarily easily and was also very popular as roofing shingles. So this would have been a dual-purpose project where you would have both the roofing shingles coming out of it, other things slate could be used for, like tiles and countertops, and then on top of that, you were also building a canal to connect the Susquehanna to the Schuylkill. The next example is the Washington Street Tunnel in Chicago. I will bring it up how quickly we got off of Tampa. And naturally, we get a picture of some lines in the sky with a red circle around it and no
These
context
people
whatsoever.
don't
And then I reversed image
they're
searched it with
very
both TinEye and Google
like
Lens.
ADHD.
And interestingly enough, this is definitely a doctored image. In fact, if you just look at it, it's very clearly a doctored image. The clouds in the sky appear to have been photoshopped in, as well as the lines that are clearly from a utility pole. And it's weird that he did this, because the previous image is taken from almost exactly the same angle, and shows no signs of being doctored, and also has buildings in it that are not present in the one that he shows that's doctored. If you look at it, it's very clear that some of these buildings were photoshopped in, that somebody just used the paintbrush removing tool to get rid of one building and didn't even do a very good job of it, and you can see the utility poles that were photoshopped from the previous picture. So it's very obviously a fake image, and the one right before it isn't, and is different. It's just, I don't understand. And as I got to this point in my research, I really genuinely could not tell if I felt like this was just deliberate deception or not. The next claim is that there's also a tunnel system under Pensacola, Florida, and that this is being suppressed.
I mean, this
from
is
the
why this
history
theory
books
is good on
because they
TikTok,
don't line
because
up with the official
like
PR-approved
the TikToks are not that
narratives.
long.
He then moves on to claim that there is a
I
massive
always
tunnel
choose a 10
system
minute
under
option. I'm like,
Pensacola,
girl, let's
Florida,
record 10 minutes.
and his evidence for this appears to be an article written in a magazine that I was not able to find. But here's how this goes. There is a legend that when the Spanish left Pensacola, they had secret tunnels under the city and they didn't tell anybody where they were. A Mike Henderson, writing for the aforementioned unnamed magazine, claims that he had been inside and that the entrance was at Fort Barrancas, and claims that they lead all the way downtown. Of course, he has never actually gone through them all the way downtown. He was just sure that they led there. Additionally, the tunnels under Fort Barrancas are on TripAdvisor. He also claims as evidence that the nearby Naval Air Station, which has some of these old tunnels under it, has signs that say danger, restricted area, and those signs are placed just before the entrances to 236-year-old unmaintained tunnels. So clearly there's a conspiracy here. But now we're finally actually back to Tampa Bay,
Yeah.
but it's not to talk about
Do not
tunnels,
go
it's to
into the
talk about Tampa
unmaintained
Bay Hotel,
200-year-old
built by
tunnels.
Henry B.
Don't do
Plant.
it.
Of course, it is
There's
now
bad
the
news
Henry
bears.
B. Plant Museum, and that building was constructed from 1888 to 1891 as part of Plant's ambitions to dominate the Florida railroad and shipping market. He was, of course, a railroad and steamship magnate.
So a lot of
and
these
he had
things will
just
say
built
we
a
don't have
rail line
construction
all the way
photos for
down to
these
Florida.
buildings,
He himself
when you
was
can
from New
very
York,
easily
and
find
along that
construction
rail line, to
photos of these
encourage people
buildings.
to
Yeah.
travel on it and use the passenger trains and make him money, he planted a whole bunch of hotels, one of which was the Tampa Bay Hotel. And it's pretty well known in the area that Henry B. Plant is responsible for much of the industrialization of that part of Florida. And Plant's activities were well documented during his life. It's not
Yeah,
like this
so,
is something that was kind of
Florida,
just written on your
basically,
blog or in
rich
your
guys would
textbook
buy a
later.
lot of
In
land,
fact,
then
we've
they
got
would
articles
build
discussing his business in
hotels
Weekly
on that
Daily Eagle
land
on
and
10th of July,
railroads that led
1890,
to
the
those
St. Louis
hotels.
Globe Democrat on the 6th of March, 1892, and in the Philadelphia Inquirer on the 8th of October, 1885, as well as
Something
many,
an alligator
many, many
Alcatraz.
other mentions of Henry B. Plant. Mind Unveiled goes on
Yes.
to claim that this building is actually Old World architecture built by the Tartarians,
Oh my God.
and this is because of the Moorish exterior, Moorish revival, really, and the European interior. Now, primary sources from the era that would be, photographs, documents, magazines, newspapers, architectural plans, all sorts of things, all will tell you that back in the late 1800s, what was fashionable in Europe was fashionable in the United States. This was actually basically the case all the way up until World War I. Much of American style, what Americans considered to be the upper class, the upper echelon of life, was taken from Europe. But of course, Mind Unveiled is saying that he doubts this video was built at the time it was claimed, that it's actually Tartarian architecture. He goes on to say, most of the time you'll get a few construction photos, but it's fascinating to find out how poorly documented the construction process was during this time. At this point
Yeah, so
in the video,
why would you
he
take a
has
bunch
on
of pictures
screen
of
a very blurry image of the
construction site?
construction of the Tampa Bay Hotel with scaffolding and all of that
do
he
you remember it?
claims shows it completely built, and there's text
The-
on screen. I'll have the picture up on screen. There's text on screen that says
No.
that why is this the most high quality image available when we have HD ones, when we should have the HD capabilities? Well, it's not the highest quality one that you can find. In fact, if you go to the very website he's talking about, the photograph is there and you can blow it up into full HD, full screen resolution, and you can actually tell when looking at the full HD version that yes, half of the building has not even reached the full height yet. That it is very
And you
much
look in the
being
windows,
built,
you
and
can
there
see
are
that the
people
building
in the
is like
photograph
a shell.
who can tell that
Yeah.
the construction process was ongoing. So
It's
either
like
he
shiz,
didn't
like
look
the set they
or
built
he's
for
lying.
Wicked.
He also mentions what he calls vanilla
Right,
skies
they
in
built
the
the
background of
exterior
photo,
walls first
not
and then the interior.
detailed, kind of just off-white sky. The entire photo is in sepia, and it was 1880s photography. And he
Yeah,
also
so you
mentions
know
that
enough
there are a
about
lot of these
like
early
pictures.
cityscape
Like
photos that
the
don't show
sky
anybody
is not
in them.
detailed
Why do
because
we have
the
these
sky's
empty
blown
cities?
out.
We must have just dug them out of the ground and then populated them later. We'll get to that. But the thing is, when you're trying to get a detailed image of a cityscape on an archaic camera, you're going to have a very long exposure time.
Yeah.
And the thing is, people don't really stay in place all that long. So they simply won't show up. The camera will not register due to the old technology. The fact
I
that there
find this
were,
stuff
in fact, people
fascinating
on the street
of like
because
explaining
they
why
moved too
these
fast for the
things
camera
that
to
people
capture.
don't
You can see
understand,
this in a lot of old
like
photographs
they have
where
purpose.
things that are
That's why I
taken at a
wanted to
little
show
bit
you
more
this
of a
one
tight angle. You can see that
because
somebody will be walking and they're perfectly represented, but somebody else will be running and that person will be blurry. Now, of course, he does mention other clear signs of photo manipulation, but says that that's an entirely different video to avoid, explaining what he means. And very ironically, he actually shows a number of very obviously doctored photos in support of his theory throughout the entire video. He's also very fond of presenting information, questioning its legitimacy, and then just giving reasons why it might be incorrect before moving on, but he never actually makes a point. He never discusses any evidence. He's just like, do you really believe this? And yeah. He does this with the Ponce de Leon Hotel in Tampa, and it's the one it's the first building in the United States to be made entirely of poured concrete. And I would show you the clip and the context, but several other creators who have engaged with Mind Unveiled in the past reached out to me to tell me that if I used any of his clips, he'd probably copyright strike me. So I will not be doing that. I'll just timestamp where you can go watch the context. He also notes that these hotels were built with full electricity installed, which is weird because there wasn't much going on in Florida at the time, so we're told. Of course, this is not remotely true, and the idea that people didn't plan cities and didn't actually actively encourage people to move there in the 1800s is wild to me. Like, that's a well-known fact. Right. And as we know, Henry B. Plant, since the 1880s, had been pushing for people to move to Florida, to industrialize Florida, so he could make money on his rail lines and his steamships. And of course, Henry B. Plant was not the only one. There were other people who were at the same level as him, doing the same thing all over the United States. We'll actually end up talking about one, Charles Broadwater.
A lot of the United States,
that this entire theory is
like a rich guy who buys up a bunch of land and then tries to get people to move there so he can sell them the land.
This old world architecture, that it can't be explained. And the problem with that is there's an explanation.
One of the ways that the federal government paid for the Transcontinental Railroad is that they gave the railroad not every piece of land along the railroad, but alternating parcels.
I have one because I do this.
So the federal government would own every other parcel, and the railroad would get paid for their work in the parcels of land along the railroad. So the idea is that you get people to settle land next to the railroad as a way of paying for the railroad.
This would be a very interesting point if he didn't also call neoclassical, Second Empire, neocolonial, Gothic Revival, and basically any other 1800s architecture style Tartarian, despite the fact that there is very little, if anything, in common between Moorish architecture and neoclassical.
Surprisingly, these people who don't believe in history don't understand that there are different kinds of architectural styles.
World, and so you were getting a lot more influence from countries that previously didn't have much of a say in American events or in culture, history, style, places that were still behind the times in terms of technology, and so just weren't really putting their own culture out as much. It can also be explained partially by the fact that America is a nation of immigrants. One example he gives is the Moorish Revival style architecture, the Moorish influenced architecture of the city of Opelika, Florida. Opelika, Florida. It might be Opeloka. I've given up with Florida. Today that city is within the urban sprawl of Miami and Fort Lauderdale, how that's just kind of one big coastal city, but it does maintain its own municipal government. The city itself was actually designed by Glenn Curtiss of the Curtiss Aircraft Manufacturing Company in 1926. This was during the Florida land boom, when all of the work that Henry B. Plant and people like him had done in the 1880s and 90s was dragging a whole lot of people to Florida because suddenly there was stuff there. Now, Mind Unveiled suggests that this architecture is actually considerably older and built by the Tartarians. There's a few problems with that. We have photography of the Miami area before Opelika was built, and it is not there. And Opelika differs considerably from the other buildings from Tampa Bay that he shows when you look at them side by side. The Henry B. Plant Museum, what was once the Tampa Bay Hotel, looks very different from the City Hall of Opelika. But most importantly, it should be mentioned that
but it has
University of
domes.
Miami has a
Right,
document
so
with before and after pictures showing the construction of Opelika,
kind of
Florida,
like Lady
right
and
there on
the
its website.
weren't there bells
It took me
here?
a single Google search to find it. It's got construction photos, plans, articles about it being built, the whole 9 yards. It's not just the one document with the before and after photos, it's a bunch of documents. He also asks if you've ever wondered why it's called St. Petersburg, Florida, but does not ask the same question about Syracuse, New York, or Suffolk, Connecticut, or really any other American city named after a European city. Look, I'm not saying that it's necessarily a bad argument, I'm just saying that if you're gonna argue based on place names, be consistent. Now, he does go on to mention other cities, but he's not focusing on their names, he's focusing on their architecture. Which, again, I must remind everybody that Moorish architecture and Russian architecture are not the same thing. And the ones he brings up
Moorish
also
is
aren't
Spain.
Russian or even necessarily consistently Moorish. The first one he shows is Central Synagogue,
I think I have
which
Moorish,
is in Manhattan,
like,
and
DNA.
it features a Moorish Revival exterior
something like that came
with
up
a
on my
more
DNA
European-style
test.
interior. Specifically
So the Moors were the Islamic rulers of Spain before the 1500s.
I have a medieval studies degree. I know what neo-Gothic architecture looks like. I didn't need to look that up. But when I did have legitimate questions about the architecture style of a certain building, I called up my buddy, who's a
When I was a baby dim nerd, I thought the Moors was named after the Arabians.
He's getting his Masters of Architecture.
Oh,
And again,
that's
this
hilarious.
is not a Russian-style building. And he keeps acting like the Russians.
You're
and
like,
the
what is
Moors
your
are
obsession
interchangeable.
with?
They're not. They're very different cultures.
That's
Next,
funny.
we get Islam Temple, which is not a Muslim temple at all,
That's
but
funny.
rather a Shriners Temple, which was built in 1917. Now, the Shriners are a part of an appendant body of Freemasonry, which means that you have to be a Master Mason to join, but not all Masons are Shriners, nor do all Masons share the beliefs or mission of the Shriners. Now, if you are one of the people out there who has convinced yourself that the Freemasons are all evil Satanists, this probably won't change your mind, but I know a bunch of Shriners, and they give up their weekends to go and entertain kids at children's hospitals. Like they do stuff
so
like clowns and
he's
play
a
toys with
Mason,
them.
and
It's
one of
actually
his
really
arguments
great
is
and wholesome. Shriners
that
hospitals
it's a
also
bunch of guys
provide
who
care
go
at as low a
and
cost
like
as
drink
possible,
and
even free in
talk
some
about shit.
circumstances. And just to lay it out there, I am not a Shriner. Now, as far as evidence that it's not older than 1917
And he's a Freemason.
goes,
Oh, he's
an
just my
article in
type.
the Architect and Engineer of California, dated to September of 1917, a J.F. Dunn writes, in the new shrine temple being created on Geary Street, San Francisco, is found a rare example of a building designed in a historical style. Now, another document about a similar temple by the same name is available online, but to be very clear, that one's in Sacramento, not San Francisco. And I'll give it to him that I couldn't find any photos of its construction, but it was just one of many buildings being built in San Francisco that year, so it's not too surprising there's no photos. And as I said, there is contemporary documentation that the building was not yet completed. So, and also, just to be perfectly clear, I'm not getting all of this from like articles that were written in the last 20 years. I'm going back and I am finding the scans of the original documents that were written in 1917, that were written in 1885.
There's
So
another
I'm looking
leftist on
at the
YouTube who did a
actual
video
document,
about right-wing
not
rhetoric
somebody
on European
transcribing
history
it into something
being
else.
white
I think it's
history.
also
He
a
did
good
with
time to mention
if
photography
in
and its
Spain,
evolution,
European,
because a lot of the buildings that he
Spain,
brings
European,
up
because a
were
big chunk of
constructed
their
when
history
only
involved
daguerreotype
the
photography
Moors
was
were
available.
not
Now, daguerreotype
white.
photography, the gist of
Or
it
not
is
white.
it works differently. You're basically etching the image onto a silver plate, which is not the same way that modern photography or the photography that developed after 1854 worked. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I totally understand it, but I'll remember to leave the link to how this works in the description. But the thing about daguerreotypes was that they were difficult to reproduce. Either an artist had to copy it, a photorealistic artist, or you had to take yet another daguerreotype of your daguerreotype. So there aren't a lot of copies. Now, the practice of using cameras that captured on negatives and were then copied to get you the positive.
One of my professors in grad school was an expert on
In fact, it was
this kind of
absolutely not available
photography,
to the public before
and she talked
1854.
about
Now,
she
the newer
bought
kind of photography
for a
were
museum.
not
She
as
bought
precisely
a
detailed as the
bunch of
daguerreotype was,
photos
but
of the
they were easier to
Mexican-American
reproduce
War in the
considerably.
like
The next example we get
1840s,
is the Farmers
and the
Exchange
guy
Bank
delivered
in
them to
Charleston,
her
South Carolina.
wrapped
Because it was
in
constructed before 1854, any photographs of it are likely
not toilet
daguerreotypes,
paper,
and therefore copies are hard
paper
to come by,
towels
so I couldn't
in a
find
shopping
any photos
bag,
of its construction.
and she was just
Also, given
horrified
how
because
old the
all
city
she
of
could imagine
Charleston
is
you can't
that
find
the
photographs
image
of
is
Charleston
wiping
before
off
the
as
building
he
was there.
swung the
And the
shopping
area
bag.
in which
Oh my
that
God.
specific building was built is one of the
Can you imagine?
earlier populated areas of Charleston. And he also hits us with the Inad Shriners Temple, which is in East St. Louis, Illinois. But the thing
Yeah.
is, if you
So
go on
part
their
of this
website,
is like
there are photos of it being constructed. You can also find other
people
photos of it being
obsessed with
constructed.
the
It's very
Masons,
clearly not,
like
not old world architecture, as he claims. The next example we get is that he
like
claims that old world churches,
reach
and I
weird
think he's talking
conclusions.
about Romanesque and Gothic revival here. That most of the examples he shows are one of those two things when it comes to churches. But he says they have questionable history as being rebuilt or moved multiple times. He directs us to Sacred Heart Catholic Church, which was actually built twice, but for a very good reason. According to the church itself, and on their website, a small church was built there in Tampa, Florida in 1859, and that church served the entire Catholic community of Tampa.
So I mean,
But as
so
Plants
he goes on
Railroad
for a
and
long time
steamships
He does.
in
led
this
to
video
more
on
and
this
more growth
sort of
in the
thing.
region,
So we don't
they
have to
had
watch it
build
all,
on
but I wanted you to see that all of this evidence could be is easily
Misconstrued.
debunked.
Yeah.
But you have to like dig through and find where these people are drawing their pictures from, and like so it takes so much longer to debunk this shit.
Right, because it's just
Then
so
it-
convoluted.
Right. And so no one who wants to believe this is going to sit through his 3-hour video
Right.
showing how all of the evidence is shit.
And he's hot as hell, but like I was like, okay, you know what?
Yeah, no,
I would love for him to talk about me
didn't
in my
want us
ear.
I didn't want us to watch a lot of it, but I wanted you to see how easily this stuff is debunked. But it's just like
Well,
so much shit.
it's like flat Earth. Like what? What? Flat? You think it's flat, girl? Like, what?
I mean, my favorite
crazy.
part about flat Earth is that last year, a pastor in Colorado who believes in the round Earth basically paid up for, or what he did was he offered to pay for any flat earther influencer to go to Antarctica with him.
Mm-hmm.
And a bunch of them turned him down.
I would
And
have
you're like,
won.
yeah, because I mean, if you really believe the earth is flat, why don't you take his offer? If you know it's not flat and you're a grifter,
You get to show him.
you don't. If you're a grifter, you know the earth is round.
Right.
You don't want to go down there and be shown the truth.
And look stupid in front of all these people.
Right. So like the flat earthers who did take this guy's offer up, like they went down and they saw the like all 24-hour sun, and like the flat earth community just announced that they were all shills and plants, and what they saw wasn't real. Like,
wow.
So like it a lot of,
I mean,
like,
it's like a filet do.
I used to think conspiracy theories were fun, and then like QAnon happened.
Oh my god, I know. They're the worst.
And
He's the worst.
I was like,
Whatever.
suddenly I start like seeing conspiracy theories as much more dangerous.
Well, of course.
Because like,
yeah, because they can erase the entire narrative. They can change the entire narrative of something. And like,
and also like, if you think people are like lying to you and hiding things from you, then you get violent with them. Like the guy who attacked Nancy Pelosi's husband with a hammer.
Yeah, and him, the guy that just killed fucking the senator from her, you know, like,
yeah, Minnesota,
Minnesota.
the two states.
Like, and people
Like,
just thinking that, like, you know, Biden's a pedophile or like this, that, and the third. I'm just like, girl, and the whole Pizzagate. I'm like, girl, for what? When they're
like,
the pedophiles, like it's just
yeah. So like, for instance, the quote unquote Pizzagate restaurant, which is just a pizzeria.
Truly.
Like somebody walked into that place with an assault rifle to free the children in the basement, and there's no basement. So like, the workers in there are in danger because he's looking for a basement that doesn't exist, and when they tell him it doesn't exist,
he gets violent.
Yeah, so like, that's like, as Tasty says, the conspiracy theories are fun when it's about stuff that doesn't matter, but very quickly these things do matter.
Evolve into something crazy. I mean, like, I believe some conspiracy theories. Some are just far too much for me. Far too much.
Like, I'll give you a conspiracy theory I believe in.
Okay.
So I believe in something called the October Surprise of 1980. It's the idea that the Reagan campaign made a deal with the Iranians to make sure that the hostages in Iran did not get freed before the election, so that Jimmy Carter would not get credit. Now, like, there's lots of circumstantial evidence to do that, but there's no direct evidence. I'll admit that that's a conspiracy theory. I believe it happened.
Yeah.
But also, I have to accept that that's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
But
I'm not gonna share what I believe in because I don't want to. I'm very tired of this.
But anyway, so I like, this one is wacky because if you look at I did not show you the video on the original Russian conspiracy theory because it's incredibly complicated and very dull.
Yeah, no, we're not doing that. I would fall asleep. I've been white knuckling over here.
But the thing that I wanted to say about this is like, so the process, as far as I can figure out, for how this, like, people came to believe this, is this Russian conspiracy theory called New Chronology gets put out into the world. It's about how, like, Russia was the, like, civilizing force of the world.
Of all people.
Yeah. And I mean, there are all sorts of wacky things. That thing believes that the medieval ages weren't existing. So like that a bunch of history is made up. And this gets out, like the Russians promote it because it involves Russian nationalism and glorifies Russia.
Yeah.
It gets out into the internet, and then these like stupid people get a hold of it, and
Who
they
think
start
they're so smart?
The stupid people who think they're smart start iterating on it, and it mutates into this. And the Russians are like, no, not like, because this version of the conspiracy theory has the Russians be the bad guys. So the Russians keep going, no, you've got it all wrong.
That's the
But
wrong
they
one.
started this. But they started this.
And then when it backfires, it's like, no, you got too far.
Yeah, so this is one of those cases where like Russian misinformation, like they're like, yes, the Russians are promoting a bunch of misinformation, but they're not like masterminds.
Right, by no means.
Anyway, so that's all I wanted to show you tonight. You should at some point, if you want to be entertained, Mia Mulder is a good follow. Her video about why people think the world is run by secret trans people.
Oh yeah, I've subscribed to her. And this guy.
It's totally worth watching. So anyway,
tomorrow morning, what time?
For
the Bundesliga.
What day is it?
Tomorrow Saturday.
Is it Thursday or Friday?
Today's Friday.
Like today's Friday. Okay.
Friday. Tomorrow's Saturday. Bundesliga at 9:45 my time.
Yeah, so we will watch the Bundesliga. It's going to be a low-key meet. A lot of the big stars aren't competing. Obviously, Helen Kevrich is hurt or is injured and recovering. The Leah Kwass and Karina Schoenmeier are not participating because the German championships are in a couple of weeks, and they would really like to be German champion since Helen Kevrich is not there.
Should I show them the leotard design or no?
Yeah, go ahead and show them. It's a great leotard.
So let's explain. So for the Utah is holding a leotard design contest, and the first thing that came to mind was this number. The girls did not like it. They didn't care for it. And I was like, okay, fair. So then they were like, well, why don't you use? And now I wanted to, if you see here, I included Native American motifs. But I couldn't find like specific Ute people, Native motifs or patterns or anything like that. So I was like, I don't want to be offensive. So then the girls were like, well, why don't you try the mountain range, the Utah mountains? I'm like, well, what mountain range is in Utah? The Wasatch Mountains. I didn't fucking know that, but the Wasatch Classic, of course. They kind of connected the dots. And so then someone, Anna, Squishy brought up the state flower, which is the Siga, I forget what it is. The Stregonona, the Siga lily, Tega lily, Siga lily. That. And well, this is when first my mind was like, you know what? Let's do the front first, because it's a lot. And this is what I came up with. I think I wanted kind of it to be kind of superhero-y, but still kind of Utah, but you know what I mean? Kind of modern and crystallized. Yeah. And so then the back, I took a risk, and this is what I came up with. It looks cute. At first, Lily was a little too low, but I like it.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I really hope they like it too.
I mean, it's not a stolen ice skating one, a rhythmic one, so that's good. That's good. So I don't know. Hopefully, if they choose it, people are gonna be mad. So, but yeah, this is what we did. I think it's cute.
When we were trying to help you, we were trying to think of what are symbols of Utah that are not Mormon, and there are
far too many.
A lot.
Like bumblebees are Mormon, apparently. Are they?
Even though they're on the state flag, but it's still a Mormon thing, and it so I like this. Yeah. I like it a lot, and I like how you got the lily to stand out. A lot of the your earlier drafts.
Did not.
It was kind of muddy.
Yeah, it was. I dropped Shadow and all this other stuff. But hopefully I win. If I win, people are gonna get mad. And I think it's hilarious.
Okay. You go
I'm
sleep
gonna go
because
sleep.
you are
I'm
clearly tired.
exhausted. Oh, it's non-elk. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. The Utah state animal is elk,
Of
and I
all
was
things.
like, maybe the animal, and then I looked it up and I'm like, oh no.
I mean, you can do elk. There's a way to do elk, I feel like, but yeah. Anyway,
You have a nice night.
Yeah, bye,
Okay.
Catherine. To you, the viewer, listen, girl, I'm exhausted, so I'm just gonna give it to you, you know, really quick. First and foremost, don't forget, as always, because you know we support. Go donate all your money to Kinsley. Yeah, so if you're alone tonight, or if you're not doing fireworks this year, donate the money to Kinsley. Hold on, let me hold on. Oops. Okay, hold on. Let me. No, that's not me. Oh my God, just select me there. Donate your money to Kinsley, okay? I want you to take a screenshot, okay, and then go to your gallery and then like press and hold, right? And then go donate your money to Kinsley. Do the thing right here. All your money. I don't care anymore. Your bank account, who needs it? Send it to Kinsley. Send it to Kinsley. Send it to Kinsley, okay? She's a upcoming mother. Okay? Send it to Kinsley. Send her diapers too. And baby wipes. Need them, okay? Send it to Kinsley. All right? That, and then I have, is this the one? No, this is it. This one to donate to Fist Gymnastics. My hands don't reach that far. So yeah, this one is to donate to Fist Gymnastics. Go do that. That's wonderful. That's very nice of you as well. Anything other than Flip Now, which is a flop. Okay, I said it out loud. Whatever. Be mad at me. I don't care anymore. The truth hurts, I guess. I love you so much. I think, okay, if no one saw you said I think you're amazing. I think you're wonderful. I think you're incredible, very smart, very intelligent, very demure, very recatada. It's demure in Spanish. I love you. I adore you. I truly do. I'm exhausted. Go wash your face, wash your ass, brush your hair, brush your teeth, wear deodorant, drink water. And don't be a cunt unless it's to Republicans. Listen, it's about to get rough, okay? It's about to get really rough. They passed a big fucking ugly-ass, bitch-ass bill. If we ever have a re-election again, go out and vote. Make sure you check your registration. They're doing funky things with it. And yeah, Diva, it's gonna get rough. It's gonna get rough. So, I adore you. I'm gonna go to sleep. Fuck this day. I do not care about this day. Klaus, come here. Come here, Gatti. I think we all should sing happy birthday to Klaus real quick. Let me make us a bit. Come here, Gatti. Come here, Gatti. Come here. Go ahead. Come on. Oh wait, come on, Gatti. There he is. Yay, Klaus. Yay, happy birthday, Klaus. Happy birthday to Klaus. Happy birthday. Don't lean over. Happy birthday, my baby. Happy birthday, Clutty. Yay. You turned year 4. I love you so much. Yay, Klaus. Okay. Me and Klaus are going to go lay down. I love you so much. Bye. Ooh. You want to say hi? All right. And stop. And stop.